Welcome, I'm David from the Financial Services Council. Just a warm welcome to this fourth webinar in our FSC Connect series. Following on from earlier in the week where we heard from Jazz Thornton, I'm delighted to welcome Kathryn Jackson, who's going to give us a whistle-stop tour of some simple and practical strategies to better understand and build wellbeing at work. Just as a bit of a brief introduction, and I'll hand over to Kathryn. Some of you will be familiar with Kathryn as a panellist at our Towards Wellbeing conference last September, and hosted by Jack Tame, and also running a special Emerging Leaders session. Kathryn's background is, I think it's something like 20 years. Kathryn, you can correct me, as a people professional, and especially during the 2010 earthquakes in Canterbury, where you worked with a bunch of clever academics studying wellbeing and resilience. So I think from that, and with your other experiences, especially with the book, Resilience Work, and also the Kite sport app that you've just been developing, I think it's a great opportunity to learn and understand some little tools and practical applications for wellbeing in the workplace. So at that point, I'll hand over to you, Kathryn, and let you get on with it.
Thanks very much indeed, David. Thanks very much indeed, David, and welcome to everybody wherever you're listening from. As you just heard, I'm going to whistle-stop through some information which I hope will be of some help to you at this time. We're planning on around 40 minutes, 30 to 40 minutes of me talking, but there's some time at the end for questions, and what I'd love to encourage you to do all the way through this is to use the chat box. If I talk about something and you have questions, or if something just springs to mind, that would be fantastic. Now, obviously, we're looking at a very random picture of the Zoom meeting attention span. I'm hoping that the actual meeting content for our time together today is going to be slightly more than 2%. But like many of you, I am also in the learning zone of this new environment we find ourselves in, and so I'm taking comfort from the fact that I'm probably not the only person who's wearing slippers right now, and I have to confess, this is the first time that I have been in a conference presenting to over 100 people, and I've actually got myself surrounded by post-it notes as opposed to actually having speaker notes. It's all just a strange new world that we're in right now. So speaking of strange new world, this is something that I shared with my husband just a couple of weeks ago when we first went into lockdown. So I just wanted to start by acknowledging that the world we're in is very, very stressful and very, very different. He encouraged me to capture this because we felt like it really summed up what was happening right now. You know, I'm working in a house where, you know, my computer is stacked up on 2 cardboard boxes to talk to you today. My husband's commandeered the lounge to be able to do his work, and we're hoping that Mr. 8, who's currently homeschooling for the first time in his life, doesn't make an appearance. But you know what? If he does, that's absolutely fine. This is the new world. Excuse me, the new world that we're finding ourselves in right now. So what am I hoping to talk to you about today? Well, just this really, some simple practical strategies to better understand and hopefully navigate well-being at work in this new world. So how on earth have I come on this journey, and who on earth am I? Some of you listening may be familiar with my work, but to be perfectly blunt, I had a very accidental journey into the world of wellbeing and resilience. I did spend the first sort of 15 years of my life in the corporate and financial world, working for Anderson's, the Royal Bank of Scotland and Bank of Scotland over in the UK, but moved to New Zealand in 2006. At that time, I set up a coaching practice and was enjoying that, but all of a sudden, obviously, everything changed. I live in Christchurch, and so I suddenly found myself plummeted into the world of actually understanding how to stay focused on doing the everyday stuff that we find so hard to do when everything around us turns to custard. I talked about this, as David said, at the Financial Services Conference last year. And, you know, at the time, I had no idea, of course, that the kind of things that we were talking about were going to become quite so helpful and relevant for us in the world today. For those of you that didn't attend, the next best time to learn about this stuff is now. So hopefully I'll give you some hints and tips as to what to really focus on over the next 30 minutes. As a result of the work that I did in Christchurch, I was lucky enough to be able to create some resources. And so, as David said, Resilience at Work, I've been blown away by the success globally of that one, with it being nominated for several awards. I just feel the information that we learned in the Christchurch environment about how to better navigate extreme uncertainty and stay focused on the bigger picture while acknowledging that actually everybody is on a journey through this, was something that was really important for me to capture and then to share. And I think we can see that the speed at which the government has got up to date with their emergency response really reinforces, I think, what we've learned, sadly, over the last 10 years about responding to emergencies. I do work now with the New Zealand Institute for Wellbeing and Resilience. I'm one of their associates, and you may have seen quite a lot of Lucy and Denise's work in the press right now, because I really can't reinforce enough that there is no better time than to learn about wellbeing and resilience than right now, because we're all going to need to be incredibly strong over the next few years. This isn't going to go back to normal when we get back into the office. There is going to be a new normal that we need to navigate. And so, you know, one of those sort of key questions that I'd love us to think about is, you know, what are we noticing? How are we seeing the world around us right now? And what I'd like to do is just encourage you to use your chat box to answer two questions that I'm going to pop up on the screen in a moment. I've deliberately designed these questions so that we can use them towards the end of the workshop. So if you could just have a think about them and pop your answers into the chat box, that would be great. And the two questions are these: what is one thing, just one thing, that you've been really struggling with since this global situation unfolded? For me personally, it's been handling that guilt of trying to keep my own business afloat and up and running, and responding to the huge demand for wellbeing and resilience initiatives, while also trying to make time for a little 8-year-old boy who is, you know, at home and trying to navigate his own lack of friends to stay with and structure of the day with school. But also the second, one thing that you've noticed as a result that's positive or better as a result of our changing world, and something that I've really noticed as a result of the world that we're in right now, is this kind of permission to be ourselves and bring more of ourselves to work. You know, I've had been involved in board meetings where somebody's had children joining us, you know, or where people have, you know, really allowed themselves to be human, and we don't just find that we're able to leave ourselves at the door. You know, suddenly we're able to come into our workspaces with our home life, because it is our home life. The two are so much more combined. So we're going, if I could get you to pop those into your answers to those into the chats as we go through the rest of the presentation, that would be really great. So I promised I'd take some time exploring, you know, what to expect from an emotional perspective. And I guess I really wanted to start with the bad news. There is no magic wand that will bring us through this, and this is not going to be an easy journey. And I think it's really important for us to remember that we are the captains of the ship. We get to be the captains of the ship during good weather, and unfortunately, what we're in and what lies ahead is not good weather. But if we can stay focused on the fact that we have received training to navigate difficult times, if we haven't, and if we're worried about that, reach out to your learning and development teams, your HR teams. Reach out to mentors in your industry to look to get support from them around how they're managing things, or look to our governmental leadership. Wherever we are with our political views right now, we're seeing some incredible examples overall of how to lead through uncertainty. And to the extent where I literally just saw yesterday, the Harvard Business Review is currently studying Jacinda and has written some really interesting reflections on her leadership, which I'll make sure is shared with you in the materials at the end of this workshop. So that's kind of the start of the bad news. The reality is that, you know, this Linda Holt is a wonderful lady I've been working with, and you know, the suffering of other humans is not going to leave you untouched. You know, whether we're looking at the world through the lens of our own personal suffering, as in where am I going to pay my bills? How do I feel as far as anxiousness and fear as to what's ahead? Or whether we're looking at our world through the lens of fear for overseas, you know, people who live overseas who we're worried about, or people who we don't know who live overseas who are having to navigate grief and death and sickness, and many of them alone. You know, this is something that we are hardwired as humans to be impacted by. So please know that being impacted by this and feeling sadness, grief, loss, fear, these are all very, very human emotions based on the world that we see right now. In fact, one of the really important pieces of work that we did in Christchurch was to explore emotions in more detail. And this was a word list that I put together with some counsellors to really encourage people who are in crisis times to reflect on the emotions that they're experiencing and to notice them much more. In fact, it was put together for a wonderful organisation that I worked with in construction, and one of the construction engineers came up to me and said, "Look, Kathryn, you know, I'm an engineer. I'm either happy or sad, and occasionally angry. I don't understand how there could be anything else." But so starting to grow our emotional literacy and understand and experience emotions more deeply is just going to be something that we all have to navigate over the next several years. These are the kinds of behaviours that we can expect to see at work. So again, this is based on research about what happens to people when they are experiencing significant and perhaps unexpected and unwelcome change. You know, emotional outbursts, frustration, confusion, misinformation. The bad news is this is what we're going to see in our employees, in our teams, in our people, in workplaces. A model to keep in mind as we consider how we set our businesses up to navigate this is known as the fourth wave. Now this is, I don't know where this model actually came from, but it was shared with me by a medical professional who I work with. And the thinking behind this is actually, this is a model that is used to support post-critical incident planning. This is helping us to prepare for what lies ahead. And it really does reflect the experience that we saw in Christchurch. So we didn't just see fear and mental well-being issues at the time of the earthquakes. We actually saw a massive resurgence on return to the CBD, and we also saw a 15 to 18 month resurgence as well. So it's really something to bear in mind. And with that, obviously, we need to bear in mind that everybody in New Zealand is going to be going through this at the same time. In Christchurch, we could lean out, we could rely on the strength of people outside the city to help us to get through difficult times. But what lies ahead for New Zealand is the need for us all to learn how to support ourselves and to support each other. Remember, though, that not everybody is going to find this traumatic, and some people in your team will be energised by what's happening right now. They will be energised, they will be coming up with new and innovative ways to problem solve and troubleshoot. And for them, the really important thing is, as leaders, we need to reflect on how do we help them notice and manage their well-being so that they don't burn out. Some people in your team will find that what's happening right now leaves them almost paralysed, particularly if it's exacerbated by challenges at home. So remembering that for some people, home is not a great place. It's not even a safe place. So again, at the moment, we have to be really mindful of that. But know that most of the people in your team, including yourself, will experience a mix of responses. Some days will be good, some days not so good. Some moments will be amazing. Some moments you will be sitting on your floor weeping. But know that these are all very, very normal responses. And also know that we need to start planning right now for this fourth wave, because the reality is the mental health support agencies in New Zealand are going to be overwhelmed. I'm already seeing a huge ramp up in the number of adverts for mental health specialists, so that we are ready for this. We know this is coming and we know that we need to be ready for this, but I think businesses have an enormous opportunity to do what they can to make sure that we're supporting people and helping to prevent them from needing clinical support. I'd like to share this with you. We're going to need stronger leaders, we're going to need stronger teams, and we're going to need daily reminders about the choices that we can make to stay resilient, because resilience isn't something that we get and then we have forever. We have to continually notice how we're feeling and then nurture and nudge our well-being so that we can stay as resilient as possible when things don't go to plan around us. And I think a really easy way of reflecting on this is just this model. We expect the journey ahead, whatever that looks like, whether it's getting the kids back to school, whether it's going back to work, whether it's finding clients again. We expect it's going to be simple. But what actually is going to happen for all of us is this tangled up and jumbled wobbly bit in the middle. I refer to this as life's plot twists. But the good news is that the science of well-being, which has now been around for about 20 years, we're starting to get some really great research. Now, 20 years might sound a long time to some people. If we think about more generic science, it's been around a lot longer than that. So we're just starting to be able to learn from the science and well-being to help us to navigate this wobbly plot twist section in the middle. We know that if we can activate well-being strategies when these plot twists happen, that's what builds resilience. So I like to encourage people to think about themselves as, or their teams, the people in their teams as a mobile phone battery. When you are green, you are fully charged and you are feeling good and functioning well. That's a really great mental health foundation definition to hang on to. Do I feel good and am I functioning well? That probably gives me a clue that I'm fully charged right now. During the course of my day, I will probably deplete in my energy levels. And so what well-being strategies can I choose to activate to recharge and take me back into the green? Right now, I'm going to be completely honest and say I don't think I've been green for about the last 4 weeks. I'm noticing that I'm feeling kind of yellow. My battery is depleted somewhat. I'm not as strong as I could be, but I have lots of science-based strategies that I can draw from to make sure that I'm regularly charging myself back up as far as I can to make sure that I don't reach red. Because when we hit red, suddenly life looks a lot harder to come back from. Suddenly we have to work a lot harder. If you imagine your phone battery has completely died, it's going to take you a lot longer to recharge that battery than if you recharge it when it hits kind of 70 or 80%. So that's the kind of analogy that I like to encourage people to think about. And if you were to reflect on the people in your team right now, I wonder what they might look like. I wonder how you might consider where their batteries are at right now. Who are your green batteries? Who are your yellow batteries? Who's already on red that you need to spend a little bit of extra time with, and who is very likely to need more support from a mental well-being perspective? In Christchurch, we found that people who go into critical and traumatic situations with a fully charged battery navigate those times better than those who are already sort of starting from a half-charged or a nearly flat battery. So again, making micro choices every day is what's going to be really important. So when I say micro choices, what do I mean? Well, if I go back to my wonderful construction clients, I was asked, could I please provide a flow chart for how to support people through wellbeing and resilience? And the short answer is no, because your people have stories that they bring to the situation right now. If you have somebody in your team, or if you have experienced a really, really hard and traumatic time as a result of uncertainty, then that is the memory that you're going to be bringing to the situation that's going on globally right now. So can we simplify it into a diagram like this? Not really. But it's a great place to start. And I think for many of us, having a place to start is what's going to be the most important. Many of us have spent the last however many years of our career trying to avoid talking about emotions and depth and feelings at work. But the reality is that it's going to become a part of our new normal. We're going to need to get good at noticing where are our team in their battery packs, and how can we best encourage them to support themselves, and how can we support them to ensure that they are as strong and as resilient as possible for the years ahead. So as you can see, this is really just a very quick sort of diagram to help you and your teams reflect on, how are you feeling right now? So noticing, maybe spend a couple of days with them, noticing what emotions they're feeling. Talk to them about what's causing those emotions. If they're okay and they're happy to be sad. Good grief! If they're comfortable staying in a place of sadness because they are deep feelers and right now they are finding the world a very sad place, then that actually needs to be okay. But we need to also support them gently in navigating through that so that they don't stay sad forever. This is a poster that I designed for Mental Health Awareness Week last year, actually. It got incredible feedback from the mental health population, and so it's actually used all around New Zealand. So I really, with hindsight, I had no idea it was going to be as necessary as it is right now. So other ideas that you might want to consider from science, the puzzle of the brain is fascinating, and I'm certainly not a neuroscience scientist. I'm incredibly excited by neuroscience, and what I'm finding really exciting is that we're starting to understand more about why we have quite such strong and negative emotions to the world around us, and so that is something that happens within our brain called a negative bias. It basically means that our brain is hardwired to look for things that are going to hurt us. So those moments where you realize that you've just lost half an hour of your life reading a really terrible news story, and now you feel absolutely awful and you feel helpless. This is our brain trying to reinforce, the negativity of what's happening in the world right now. And part of the risk with that is that negative emotional states tend to last longer. So they are harder to shake than positive emotional states, and they also have a much bigger impact on the people around us. So if you've got a team of, for example, 6 people, and one person in that team is really, really having a really hard time right now, their mood, their emotional state will be rubbing off on the rest of the team even more than if they were energized and looking forward to the possibility of new career directions or new products and services as a result of this new world. So helping your team to notice their emotional state sooner, and draw from one of those strength focused strategies would be really helpful. The other thing to focus on with them is to just check what their brain is telling them. So, the first thing is check that their brain is telling them the truth. I am an expert catastrophizer when I'm tired. And I've been tired quite a lot over the last month or so. So, make sure that brains are telling the truth. Or if somebody is catastrophizing, mind reading, jumping to conclusions, help them to notice that and help them to find ways to challenge that. noticing the negative, I can't read that because it's covered up, noticing the negative self-talk. So making sure that we are encouraging people to have a second voice inside their head that is the voice of a friend, that is a kind voice, that is really encouraging them to consider whether what they're telling themselves is helpful or harmful. Reframing, so taking catastrophizing and disastrous thoughts and actually reframing them and looking to state problems in the positive. These are all things that we can help our teams to do. And also to find positive moments, so switching off the negative news, really focusing on sharing good news stories from your business, encouraging them to focus on 3 good things. 3 good things is a technique used around the world to help to rewire our brains to really start noticing what are some of the good things that are happening, as well as dwelling and ruminating on the bad. So with that noticing, here are some ideas for perhaps questions that you might talk to your team about. So, how are things going for you today? I've noticed you seem a bit quieter than usual. How are you doing? How are you looking after yourself and recharging? What do you think might help you, and how can I provide you with support? Growing our ability to listen and really listen, and not expect to have the answers, not expect to be able to guide people to mental wellness. Knowing our parameters and simply hearing them is going to be paramount. So take a few moments after this call to just notice your team. Who do you know that is presenting as green or amber or red? And remember that what they present with may not be the truth. So you may need to recognize that if there are people that you don't feel that you're close to understanding, it may be an opportunity to reflect on how you grow your relationship with them. This may be an indicator that somebody doesn't trust you and somebody doesn't want to talk to you about things. So how are you going to navigate around that and potentially encourage them to talk to another person if that works, and then look for opportunities to grow and nurture that relationship, because this is obviously highlighting that there is an opportunity to do that. Listening is going to be paramount, and so if there's one thing I can really encourage you to do, it's grow your listening skills. And because so many of us listen to respond, we're sort of half listening to a conversation, but we're actually checking our phones. So being really present is going to be really important, especially because we can't just walk the floors anymore. We can't just have an open door policy and say, just come and see me if you've got a problem. The reality is we need to be reaching out more, but we also need to make sure that we're not going from one wellbeing meeting to another. So if you find you've got 70 people in your direct reporting line, and that's going to mean that you spend all of your time checking in with them, then you might want to look at how do you cut that up a little bit so that it's a little bit more manageable. Remember that resilience comes from everyday noticing and nudging. So remember that you may need to have more regular wellbeing check-ins with your team than normal, particularly because you can't see them. You don't notice that somebody's coming into the office and slamming a door shut or not saying good morning. You may need to find ways of staying in touch with them more often. Remember, resilient people notice sooner and they have more strategies to draw from. So making sure that you are talking to them about those strategies on the previous slide, and we'll make sure that you have a copy of that by the end of this presentation. So I want to just ask David, can you share a couple of those observations that came through the chat box, David, to just share what people were noticing about the world around them?
Sure, no problem. That came off mute, good. There's quite a few topics around being able to move away from the workspace, move away from the computer when it's kind of in your living space. So it's a few comments around that. Some some comments around finding positivity on calls like this and with teams. So it's like we're sort of one step away from closing that down and then having an emotional reaction to that. So a bit around that sort of stuff. And then some areas around not being able to go out and physically help people that need help.
Yeah, thank you so much, David, and thank you so much everybody who's responded, because what this typically highlights is that there are obviously two sides to every situation, and we are naturally hardwired to notice the bad and to really hold on to the negative, the things that are stressing me out, the things that I'm finding really difficult as a result of what's going on right now. But there are also opportunities to support your team by helping them to notice the good and perhaps notice what's happening that is positive. And the reason that I shared those two questions are, first of all, if people tell you that their world right now is crap, utter crap, allow that to be so. Don't feel that you need to immediately start solving it for them. In your role as chief noticer and chief listener, you're going to be giving them permission to just talk and share, and you're going to be listening. Because as they talk and share, they will give you clues about the support that they need. So listen for those clues, and then look for ways to help them navigate towards that support. And know that you're not going to fix this necessarily in one meeting. Where possible with your team, help them to refocus on the positive. So look for opportunities to ask questions like I asked at the beginning about what are you noticing that is better or more hopeful, what gives you hope about the future, so that again we're starting to help people to reframe their thinking. But also know that these two ways of thinking have the potential to polarize people and polarize teams. The people who get stuck in the negative can't quite see why on earth somebody who's hopeful and optimistic would feel that way, and the people who are optimistic and hopeful can't get their heads around why people are so stuck in negativity. So again, allow both senses within your teams and within yourself, but encourage a more of an empathetic understanding of the thought processes for both of those points of view, so that we're starting to grow tolerance for different emotional states, and we're starting to grow understanding of how we can support each other and understand the world from another person's viewpoint. So what we do know from research around the world in this kind of space, so disaster and moving through extreme uncertainty, is that these are topics that are going to be likely to be really important to your teams in the future. And when I say in the future, remember back to that fourth wave. There were no timelines on the fourth wave framework, but as I mentioned, we're probably looking at least 15 months to 2 years of timeline, possibly longer depending on how the global economy performs, because obviously we will be impacted by that. And so what I'm encouraging everybody to do is just reflect on the L&D learning and development opportunities within your organisation. Which of these topics could you dial up now with your L&D teams to be able to support your people, so that when they come back to work or even virtually, how can you help them to grow their understanding of these topics and their ability to use their learning at work, because this using of the learning at work is what it inputs to wellbeing, and when we support our own wellbeing, that's what creates resilience. The three particular topics at the moment that we are finding are really important globally. Number one, grief. So understanding and navigating grief, which isn't necessarily something that you would automatically expect, but it is a very big picture part, a very big important part of the bigger picture. We are going through a grief process on different levels. Whether we have lost somebody or not, we are losing a world that we were comfortable with. We are losing a sense of self. We are potentially losing business and people and jobs. So there is a global grieving process, and so understanding grief cycles, understanding how we move through grief and how to support people who are moving through grief is really important for us right now. The second topic we're finding really important and that people are really gravitating to is that of innovation. So how do we get unstuck? Because when we are in a high stress environment, our to not come up with new ideas. So how can we better navigate our own emotional states and create the environment for productive thinking and new ideas and creativity? The third topic that is really important to help us navigate through this, and which we're finding people are really honing in on, is that of future purpose. So, you know, how can I find a picture of myself in this new world that gives me a compelling vision, so that I have something to move forwards towards? Now, obviously, you know, David has asked me to talk about kite briefly, and so this concept of kites came as a result of the work that I put into Resilience at Work, which is my book. And I totally understand not everybody is going to want to read a self-help book or a professional development book, and so I wanted to make sure that there was a way that we could take the lessons from Christchurch and from global wellbeing and resilience and put it into a really accessible format. So KITE is a collaboration of 5 global experts. We are not hothoused and incubated and supported by global investors, and we are simply 5 professionals in wellbeing and in clinical medical support. We've come together, and within 2 weeks we have put together a resource that basically delivers a daily dose of learning, of activity, and of links to future information. So it's really designed to drip feed. You know, at the moment we're bombarded with information. I don't think I've had an email for the last 3 weeks that wasn't entitled COVID-19. You know, so this is designed to drip feed a little bit of information in a topic that the user chooses. So, so if, for example, grief is something I want to learn about first, I set my dial to grief, and for 5 days, every day, a little bit of information comes through for me to look at, some videos to watch, some exercises to do, and slowly but surely, I make daily choices to become more comfortable with understanding grief, where I'm at with grief, helping to support other people with their grief processes, and it helps me to grow long-term resilience rather than a short-term get through type of fix. We couldn't make it free, we really wanted to, but we have made it just $9.99 per user in New Zealand, which is available globally at the exact same rate around the world, and we are getting some amazing feedback. Obviously, we are a startup, so we are really sort of talking about this as often as we can, while also all of us are doing our day jobs as well. And in fact, the clinical lead is working with the NHS at the moment. So it's really, really important that I spent a couple of minutes talking about this, because I think this is probably the proudest project I've ever done in my life. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about it. Obviously, it's not a mental well-being, a mental health support. What we are trying to do, if we remember back to that model, is we're trying to help people to notice faster when they're no longer in green, and give them strategies and tools and resources to get back into green. What we have learned through going through the Christchurch earthquakes is that your teams are stronger than you think they are. You are stronger than you think you are, but you may need additional support and resources to help you make science-based choices, as opposed to simply reaching for the chocolate and the Netflix and the alcohol, which we all do. But it's very much about how do we use the science to support us. Remember that New Zealand is ramping up in this space. So employers EAP, most of you will have an EAP. If you don't, please get one, you will need one. 1737 is always accessible around the country. Lifeline, Ignite, Mental Health, and All Right, these are all organisations that are specifically set up to support your teams when they hit red or when they hit yellow, or when you don't feel that you've got the resources and the permission, and that you're going outside your boundaries to be able to support them. So please know that these are all places that you can go to for help. And in fact, I know, because I work with Ignite, that Ignite has a raft of mental health professionals, ranging from coaches like myself through to clinical psychologists. So again, it really just depends on the level of support that your person needs. I want to say an enormous thank you, and I'm going to hand over to David in a moment to find out what questions there are that you wanted to talk about. I think, what I would love to leave you with are these three really sort of important messages. Number one, expect a range of emotions. This is not going to be an easy ride, and you are not simply going to find that you have teams who are positive and everybody in that team's positive and they stay positive. Wellbeing will ebb and flow, and please follow the science to support your teams. If you are working with wellbeing professionals, please check their credentials. We are going to see a spike in people who are sort of a little bit cowboy, gung-ho. So please check the credentials of the people you work with, check the science that supports any tools and resources that you work with, and please do reach out with any questions that you have. Thank you so much.
That's amazing. Thank you, Kathryn, and great set of tools. I just wanted to reflect on the openness from you guys on the webinar and in the chat. Really interesting comments, and we'll pass all them on to Kathryn in terms of what the struggles are. But I think just interesting, just reflecting on some of the positives from the chat around the kindness of people coming together, whether that's colleagues, whether that's friends or family. The fact that people are able to spend a lot more quality time with their family because they're not rushing off to work and back again. And also the final one I'll just pick up on is the idea of the natural world is healing in terms of reduction in pollution and all that side of life. So really interesting, and thank you everyone for being so honest on that. Just a couple of quick questions, Kathryn. First one came through was about how to manage dynamics on sort of video calls between those kind of guys that have lots of energy and those guys that perhaps are struggling with less energy, and just a couple of tips on that.
Yeah, totally. Do you know, the short answer is there probably is no real answer. My recommendation is that you really encourage talking time. So one of the really great tools that goes back to, I think, the Native American Indians is that of the talking stick. So making sure that everybody in your team has the opportunity to share their thoughts on what it is that you're talking about, so that the people who are quiet reflectors get the opportunity to reflect on what they'd like to say, and also make sure that you continue to encourage your enthusiastic people to be enthusiastic, but maybe outside the meeting have a quiet chat to explore whether they might like to wait for other people to share their ideas first. Something that we're finding really intriguing, I think, or I'm finding intriguing, is if we go back to engagement styles. So I'm finding quite a few people who are naturally very introverted and like to process a lot of information, deep reflectors. If you can, give them the topics in advance of the meeting. In fact, don't single them out. Give that to everybody. I think we're actually learning some really, in a really extreme environment, some really great practices around meetings and holding meetings. Give the information in advance, let people know what you'd love them to think about, give them a little bit of information about the questions you might ask them. And that way they have some soak time, and then allow them to come and talk to you after the meeting. So, if you've got really important decisions that need making, give people in the meeting permission to come and talk to you outside that meeting with reflections that they've had.
Great, thanks, Kathryn. And just one last question, just in terms of reflecting on the Christchurch in 2010, what would be one reflection on that in comparison to where we are now with the COVID crisis?
What would be my one reflection? Did you say? Sorry, that cut off partway through.
yeah, one reflection. Yeah.
I think. So my one reflection, and I am a deep reflector, so I may come up with a different answer after this call, but my immediate response is that Christchurch was the dress rehearsal. And so, Christchurch was unprecedented at the time. And you know, I was involved in supporting Kaikoura as well after the North Canterbury earthquakes, and so you know the enormity of what you are facing is paralysing. So how can we break that down for ourselves into little daily steps? What can I do today that takes me one step closer or makes it 1% better than it was yesterday? Don't look at the big picture and think, right, we've got this, because we haven't. So how do we look at taking baby steps and breaking it down into smaller chunks that we can navigate through one at a time? And I guess the other thing, sorry, this is too, is expect to have to change your story. So for me, you know, what the advice I'm giving you now is advice based on what we're observing and seeing and noticing now. It's what the science is telling us now. In 6 months, in 8 months, we might have a different story. In 6 weeks, 8 weeks, we might have a different story. But know that the advice that you're giving in the moment is the best possible advice that you could, but stay close to the science of well-being for me to look at how that changes and grows and evolves as we navigate through this.
Brilliant. Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Kathryn. That's great. And listen, we're just going to launch a poll. This webinar was put out because you guys out there asked for us to cover some stuff on on well-being webinars. So please just let us know what you think and for other stuff. And thank you, Kathryn. I mean, I agree with you. I don't think my battery's been green for quite a few weeks now. So it's really good to hear some excellent tips and about how we can manage and help our teams manage. Listen, guys, we'll stop now. There will be links to all the resources that Kathryn's talked about over the course of the seminar. Watch out for the FSC Connect email, which will come into your inbox later on this afternoon. And thank you ever so much, Kathryn, for all your help and advice.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. Kia kaha, everybody. Thank you.